Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good, sir. How are you?
I'm fine.
Great to see you after a very long time.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think we should start now, or Mr. Uttal Bhattacharya.
Yes, Professor Dr. Ghosh, I'm here.
Oh, good to see you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, same here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sharma.
Good
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone.
All my fellow panelists here and others joined.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you too.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should start the program. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to MDI's Practitioners Conversation Series on Net Zero, concerns about stability, reliability, and affordability of energy supply. We have distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them. So we have with us Mr. Sanjeev Sharma, Executive Director, Indian Oil Corporation. Mr. Sharma has over 34 years of experience in Indian downstream oil and gas sector and worked in several geographies across India in key leadership positions for Indian Oil Corporation. As a head of the corporate planning and economic studies, he is involved in analyzing global as well as domestic oil production and consumption and emerging energy trend. Currently, he is the Executive Director of Corporate Planning and Economic Studies. So, yeah. So our next, so thank you, Mr. Sharma, for your time and welcome to this Practitioners Conversation Series.
Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you.
And thank you. And our next panelist is Mr. Ujjal Bhattacharya, Director Project NTPC. He is also an alumnus of MDI. Mr. Bhattacharya has significantly contributed for NTPC's vertical and horizontal business diversification, as well as the growth through organic growth. He has an illustrious career in business development function of MDI, of NTPC, sorry, in domestic as well as international arena, with special focus on NTPC's diversification into hydroelectricity and acquisition of Koldam and setting up subsidiary companies, namely NESEL, for electricity distribution business. He has been at the forefront of joint venture formulation and project conceptualization for 1320 megawatt Maitri power project at Bangladesh. Before appointment as a director projects, he has worked as MD and CEO, Bangladesh India Partnership, Bangladesh India Friendship Power Company Limited, ED, International Business Development, and ED project at NTPC. So welcome, Mr. Bhattacharya, to your alma mater.
Pleasure to be here, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Our third panelist is Mr. Vinay Rastogi. Vinay has been the managing director at Bridge to India since 2013. He advises companies, development institutions and policymakers on vast range of strategic, policy, financial, and business development challenges in the Indian renewable energy market. He is passionate about developing successful business model that solves India's energy problem in an environmentally sustainable manner. Prior to this, Vinay spent almost 15 years as a project financer and financed a number of solar, wind, and waste to energy projects in Asia and Europe. Previously, he also worked with Standard Chartered Bank as a senior director, project finance, besides working as a National Australia Bank, Sumitomo Mitsui Bank, and ICICI Securities. And last but not the least, so welcome, Vinan.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh.
And last but not the least, our fourth speaker is my dear friend, Dr. Puneet Chitkara. He's a postdoctoral fellow of Johns Hopkins University and executive director, ITA, Lighthouse, KPMG Assurance and Consultancy Services. Dr. Chitkara has more than 20 years of experience in expansion planning, price and demand forecasting, portfolio optimization, financial impact on the state utilities and government, transmission pricing, connectivity and open access, litigation support, transmission pricing, connectivity and open access, development of new markets, assessment of market power and its abuse, socio-economic impact of electricity tariff, among others. He is known for his expertise in computable general equilibrium models, capacity expansion planning, transmission pricing, portfolio optimization, demand and price forecasting, regulatory economics, economics of technology and policy formulation. So thank you, Puneet, for your time. So thank you all my guest speakers. As you all know that the per capita commercial energy consumption in India is much lower than the global average. On the other hand, if you look at the long-term demand elasticity, it is generally higher than 1, which suggests that the magnitude of energy or the huge amount of energy that would be required in future to fulfill our economic growth aspirations. Indian energy supply as of yet is dominated by coal, and that coal mainly used for the power generation purpose. But we all know that coal is a dirty fuel, and mining and burning of coal have huge environmental impact. But on the other hand, coal can supply electricity at an affordable price and with reliability. It is also abundantly available in India. That will give us energy security benefits. So far as renewables are concerned, it is the fastest growing sector, and India, being a tropical country, is abundantly endowed with all forms of renewable energy. On the negative side, or I should not say negative, but on the other side, renewables are seasonal, and globally, there seems to be a demand-supply mismatch of the critical metals that would be required for this clean energy transition. For India, the high penetration of renewable energy may also jeopardize our energy security, as 80% of our solar cells and modules, over 80%, more than 80% of our solar cells and modules are being imported mainly from China. This is in addition to the 80% of the crude oil which we have been importing. Though recently enabling environment has been created to encourage domestic manufacturers to produce solar cells and modules. Now, in this backdrop, we would like to listen from our experts on the pathways and the feasibility of decarbonizing the energy sector by 2070. So may I request each speaker to make their opening comments for 12 to 13 minutes. There will be a quick second round, followed by the question answer session. The participants, they can type their question in the chat box. So May I now invite Mr. Bhattacharya to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. And once more, welcome and happy to be here. To start the proceedings today, I would like to start with the very basic, which is known to everybody, but nonetheless, that has a connotation to what I'm going to say. See, we are talking about net zero, concerns about stability, reliability, and affordability of energy supply. So let's understand what is net zero. And in my opinion, net zero refers to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we produce and the amount removed from the atmosphere. I am sure that none of these person in this August body will have any second opinion about this, because this is a very generic. But net zero has a huge connotations in the transition process. This involves energy transition, that is shifting from a system which is primarily worldwide based on fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, to a paradigm which is dominated by definitely clean and renewable electricity, to say only about electricity, and hydrogen and other form of energy carriers, switching away from the fossil generation. The aim of net zero is to reduce the energy related carbon dioxide emissions to help meet global climate target. If we all remember what is the target is set, if I remember it correctly, is to keep the global temperature by 2040 within 1.5 degrees centigrade of what was the baseline during the pre-industrial era, which has been identified, if I remember it rightly, as 1850 AD. I was just looking at some studies and data from NASA and IPCC and others. And even in Wikipedia, you can see the different sources give different kinds of data in terms of where we are. NASA says baseline 1880, over and above that, we have gone 1 degree centigrade already, and it's going fast. The unison is that global temperature is increasing and it needs to be curbed. Worldwide, there is a consensus, there's a real problem, and climate needs to be kept in a situation or position which does not come back on us with vengeance. Energy transition and decarbonization has become not only a topic of discussion at the institutes and universities, this has become a reality even for the people on the street. It definitely need of the hour at the global level, but for a country like India, I'll be a bit narrow in my approach here, where per capita energy consumption, as Professor Ghosh has already told, is only a fraction of the global average. Ensuring energy security, which is part of what we know as energy trilemma, is equally important aspect. Meeting the energy needs of underserved populations and improving safe and sustainable energy, providing access and equity to the poorest and most vulnerable groups is the first and foremost consideration for any society which is aspiring to reach a certain level of development standards. We belong to that group. Now, that brings to another debate, that whether net zero is applicable to all or not. Let me start with my personal conviction and proposition that despite being from a primarily coal-fired based energy producer, NTPC, I am no coal lobbyist. I personally believe, and as director who is handling the engineering as well as projects function in NTPC, I am surely driving this company towards a cleaner energy generation by reducing its carbon intensity, if not year-on-year basis, definitely by decade-on-decade basis. Because we are in an industry which is a high gestation period and high capital intensity. And if I take a radical decision today, it may lead to a lot of stranded assets. An economy like India can hardly afford that. At the same time, we should be careful about the public opinion elsewhere. Greta Thunberg notwithstanding, at least Mr. Biden should be taken care of seriously. Otherwise, we'll have other problems. So decarbonization of and reducing the carbon footprint is a must. I believe, as I said already, the coal-fired power industry is a sunset industry. And renewable energy in the form of solar, wind, these are sunrise industries. Now, I may differ with you or you may differ with me that sunset means whether it is sunset at 4:30 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. Like we remain in different geographies, depending on the latitude, the sunset takes place at different time. So in our mind space and depending on the country where we are coming from and its own economic and developmental compulsions, the sunset will also be decided accordingly. And this is the moot point today. And this is the point on which I like to harp. India, starting from COP21 seriously, even before that, through INDC and of late in COP26, has proclaimed its position. As Professor Ghosh has already told, and we all know, that to great relief to all of us, especially those who are in the energy industry, like Mr. Sharma from Indian Oil, as well as myself, 2070 gives us a lot of elbow room and breathing space to make our acts right. Now, I'll not get into the data heavy and recount what has been told by Prime Minister or what has been our positions in INDC. I think everybody in this forum knows all these things. I can only say that what we have proclaimed so far of late is we'll have 500 gigawatt of RE generation by 2030. This is one position we have taken. Second is 50% of our energy requirement, and mind the word energy here, not electricity, shall be made through renewable sources. And we'll cut down our carbon emission by 1 billion ton from now until 2030. The key word here is now and not any previous historical data or date. By 2030, we have also decided that we'll bring down the carbon intensity by more than 45%. That's a huge jump considering our position and aspiration for development. And by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero carbon emissions. That means that there needs to be a transition. And the transition has to be a graded one. And that brings to a moot point, which I think we should all delve on that if I am progressively transitioning towards net zero, that means before 2070, I'll remain net positive. So what will happen to the global GHG emission and consequent temperature rise? Would we be able to keep it within 1.5 degrees centigrade as compared to the 1850, or will be violating that only at the cost of the human civilization? That brings to the alternative argument. A, can we afford to do more radical in terms of going for net zero before 2070? Can we afford it technically? Can we afford it financially? And more and most importantly in my mind, being a democracy, can we afford it socioeconomically? These are the three challenges we need to understand. Now, if I am remaining net positive, then what America is saying, they will become net zero by 2050. China is telling they will become net zero by 2060. And Europe is still debating whether it is 2040 or 2050. Proclaimed position is 2050 though. So questions remains between now and 2050, the total CO2 or GHG emission is going to go up, up, up and up. So is the temperature going to go up and up? Or should we sacrifice our development aspiration by cutting down at the cost of the three aspects of technical readiness, financial competence or capability, and socio-economic hazard? I strongly believe that we should follow our own path and demand from the developed countries that enough is enough. While I'll be doing net zero by 2070, you become net negative much before that. And when they become net negative, that gives me the carbon space that they will be freeing for me and the developed countries, developing countries like ours, to take our development and our people's level of development to a certain level by which the minimum equity in the world will be established. I think that's my opening comment, Dr. Ghosh. Rest of the things are matter of technicalities. We can come back on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharya. So you have highlighted the pathways and the aspiration of your organization. May I now request Mr. Sharma to give his opening remarks?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Mr. Bhattacharya has already covered a lot of things which I had in mind, but whatever still balance is there, which I want to share with the audience, I think I'll do that through a small presentation I have. So I'll just quickly share the screen. Now, first and foremost, it's a very apt topic which has been chosen by MDI, because we are talking, everybody's talking about net zero. And in fact, it became more of a fashion statement of late that even the corporate started saying that I will be net zero by so-and-so year and so-and-so year. And the years are still very far off. But still, no denying the fact that climate, of course, is a big issue. And now we in India also seeing freak weather events happening. So it is something to be taken very seriously. But surely there are concerns. How stable and reliable will the energy supply be? For instance, if overnight you want to change to renewables, that's what some people think they can do, which in my opinion is not possible. So how stable and how reliable is that alternate energy going to be? And how affordable it is going to be? Because right now, if you look at the traditional fossil fuels, over so many years, the cost have started coming down and it has become affordable, and the infrastructure has been laid down in such a manner that I think it has reached, at least in India, it has probably reached every nook and corner. So that may not be the case for alternate as of now. So very good topic, I would say. Net zero, I think, has been talked about by the previous speaker, but again, the basic target which the entire community, world community is trying to drive is to keep it at least up to 1.5 degrees by 2050. And probably, that is the aim. Of course, there are different theories in this as well. Some people are talking even up to 2 degrees, but as of now, we're talking about 1.5 degrees. And the basic concept, again, like discussed previously, net zero means nothing but whatever you are emitting and whatever you are able to capture and able to reduce CO2 emissions. So emissions is equal to negative emission. That's the equation basically what net zero is all about. Again, something which has been talked, so I'll very quickly go through this one. This is about COP, which happened recently, and different pledges by different countries on different issues. Some of them pledged that they will reduce coal as a form of energy production. Then they were talking about methane. Then similarly, there were a lot of countries who were saying that, okay, they have declared a year which will be the net zero. And India also sprung a surprise by saying that, okay, by 2070 is the year where we will also be reaching net zero. And again, from the Indian side, the key takeaways were that up by 2030, non-fossil energy capacity will be brought to 500 gigawatt, which has been talked by the previous speaker. And 50% of energy requirement will come from non-fossil fuels. Now, that's a big challenge. Of course, there are a lot of plans and a lot of things are happening on that front, but that is a very significant challenge, which is going to be faced by especially the companies which are involved in the energy space. Now, coming briefly to the emissions and how things are really playing out in the field of emission. If you look at this chart, 73, that's virtually, 3/4 of the emissions are coming from energy sector. And out of that, the biggest contributor is industries. And then is transport. So while transport is made out to be the devil, it is not so big a contributor. Yes, it is, but the biggest source is your industrial sector. And within industrial sector, again, if you see the sectoral energy mix in industry, even today, coal is huge. Oil is there 10%, 23% is gas, and substantial electricity. Now, electricity again fed by coal. So this is an area where probably like my co-speaker who's from NTPC, they're working on this space. Similarly, in transport, if you will see, 91% of transport is based on oil. So again, even IOC, we are also trying to, upgrade our fuels, trying to work on ways of reducing emissions, but we are not in a position where we can do away with oil immediately or even in the short term. So while we are, adopting technologies where the emissions get reduced and the harmful effects of pollution are reduced, but this kind of space which oil is occupying in transport is really big. Similarly, if you look at buildings, again, if you look at the Western world, a lot of dependence on gas. Of course, electricity is also big. And again, this source of electricity, if it's again from the coal, then again, there's a lot of pollution. So emissions, yes, they have to be tackled, but I think in a very gradual manner, in a very calibrated manner, we have to go about. Basically, new technologies have to be adopted in whatever sectors the emissions are happening. And ultimately, what is the real challenge for especially countries like India or countries which are still underdeveloped in Africa, that they are all aiming for a higher GDP growth. That is one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum is the climate issue. So a very balancing act has to be done, and which perhaps we are doing in India as well. And in this journey, we are facing significant challenges. You have a population which is not receding. You have a population which is only expanding. For instance, India will be outnumbering China. You have urbanization which is going up and up. So more urbanization means more dependence on energy, more modern forms of energy are required, more electricity is required. So right now, if India has an urbanization space of 34%, we are saying by 2040, it will go up to 50%. Then everybody wants energy. Like in the very initial opening statement, Professor Ghosh, you had mentioned that our per capita is very less. I would like to state that our per capita is only 1/3 of the world average. So as a country, we are so deficient in energy, and there's so much of potential available that again, this is a challenge which will come on the way. So between GDP growth and climate, these three key challenges and how we overcome, that has to be done in a manner that we do whatever activity we do with a focus and be very mindful of less carbon in that activity. So in a nutshell, I would say this is the real issue which is being grappled by all the governments wherever they are, that everybody wants to grow, but at the same time try to control the carbon. Another issue, like nowadays, a lot of activism which is happening on climate front. So you cannot view just the climate part. You cannot just keep a focus on like a very, avid activist, I would say that you only talk about climate. No, there are so many other issues to be tackled. You have to talk about health, you have to talk about education, even water has become an issue. So on one side, today, when people are talking about hydrogen, huge amounts of water is required for hydrogen. And already we are facing a crisis on the planet of water. So these are issues which have to be tackled. And carbon emission, yes, we have to keep a focus, but we have to be very mindful of other issues as well, which are very relevant for humanity. So the point which I'm trying to make is that climate has to be kept in mind, but it is not only climate we have to talk about. Yes, we have to, earlier we were totally ignoring climate, but now if we keep climate also in our syllabus, I think it would be a very gradual and a very calibrated approach to develop. Just to show you what is the, people, how many people are deprived even today in 2021, there are 768 million people on this planet who don't have access to electricity. And majorly you'll find they are in Asia or Africa. Similarly, if you look at people who are deprived of clean cooking sources of energy, you look at how many, this is 2.5 billion people out of 7 billion people on earth, 2.5 even today are deprived of this. So they are relying on traditional biomass, which is polluting. They are relying on firewood, which is again source of pollution. So these are key challenges, agreed. But again, we have to work in a very, very planned manner. So I'll just try to demonstrate one small example that when we talk about fossil fuels, it has become, people say it's dirty, people say it's not good. But if you look at one particular fossil fuel, which I'm trying to, highlight here, you look at the case of LPG. Now, they say 5% of the global burden of disease on account of household air pollution is caused by combustion of solid fuels. That means traditional biomass or firewood. LPG is taking care of that. There is no indoor air pollution. And again, as a responsible government or as a responsible regime, many countries have overcome this by having a lot of schemes of financial inclusion. For instance, in India, you have the scheme of Ujjwala, where we have already provided 8 crore household connections of LPG, and another 1 crore household connections are being provided this year. So by way of these schemes of financial inclusion, in India, at least we can boast that we have reached a penetration level of 99% of the households who are having access to clean cooking. So that's a significant stride. But again, it is a fossil fuel. But then it is a fossil fuel which is much better. In fact, if you look at the statistics, there is no black carbon emission. And if you look at its comparison to other fuels, it emits 60% fewer greenhouse gas emissions compared to even electric coil tops, 50% fewer than your biomass stoves, and 90% fewer than kerosene stoves. So to that extent, just to have a very clear dividing line between fossil fuel and non-fossil fuel, I don't think that's the correct kind of path forward. I think again it will have to be a balancing act. And even in the oil industry, yes, we are also discouraging some of the fuels which are highly emitting, like we call them furnace oil and black oils. And even by virtue of court orders and all, in many areas, they have already been kind of banned, I would say. Now coming to one very specific issue, when you're talking about the reliability and affordability. Now recently, if you look at the oil and gas prices, there are two kind of theories. Do we say that the prices have gone up because the demand has recovered so suddenly post-COVID and the supply could not keep pace? Or another issue, very relevant, is that for the last 1.5 years, there has been so much of talk about climate that many of the big multinational companies have cut down on their investments in upstream. Now, for a year or two, maybe they may not impact, but there are theories that maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, the oil price will go through the roof because you won't have enough production assets. So whatever planning was there for years together for future has got disrupted because of underinvestment. So this may, one can't forecast it, but one can always think that this may lead to a kind of a commodity super cycle for oil and gas. And in the last 1 year, you have seen that how the price both of oil and gas have gone up. And again, at the pump level or at the consumer level, it is impacting society, and inflationary issues are there. So this is another one thing which we have to be very mindful when we are planning facilities. Sudden disruption should not happen. So whatever investment plans are in place, you can maybe cut them down to some level, but you just can't stop your further investments. Because on the other side, you don't have so much of renewable capacity which can take care of this. And this is just to demonstrate that what is the picture in case of underinvestment in oil and gas. So we are talking about different scenarios, and let us take, for example, a business as usual scenario. And here, if you look, if this is the demand, and if there is zero capex in oil and gas, which International Energy Agency said that it should happen from 21, that there should be no future investment in oil and gas, then look at the gap, and you can very well imagine what's going to happen to price. Similarly, on the gas front, same kind of picture emerges. So if you have this kind of thing and the supply start going down and down because of very few producing assets and no future additions, then again, there'll be a huge gap and the price is going to go out of reach. So this is one significant thing. Just by talking and having a lot of big ideas about renewables, it's not that we are talking against renewable, but the pace at which they are going to come up, I think that is very relevant. And even if you take a net zero scenario, even then, with the kind of existing assets which are operating on these fossil fuels, the base is so big that still you will require a lot of investments to happen, at least in the next, from this year till 2050. So you cannot drive the pipeline. You cannot just put a break like this IEA net zero report I'm quoting, which they said that beyond projects already committed as of 2021, there are no new oil and gas field approved for development in our pathway. So I somehow personally don't agree that you can just suddenly put a break to the investment. Similarly, in the gas market, same kind of thing happened. For the short term, there were various reasons, like you had low inventories and you had a winter which was much colder last year. And then Russia had issues of sending gas to Europe. And again, there were investment cuts in the gas space as well. Some of the big natural gas fields were shut down in Europe. So what the point I'm making is that, yes, we all feel that there has to be energy transition, but it has to be a very orderly transition. And just to tell you that in India, out of 718 districts, there are 120 districts in the country which have sizable presence of fossil fuel or fossil fuel dependent industries like coal mining, oil, gas, thermal plants, refineries and steel plants. And the population of these 120 districts is about 1/4 of the country's population. So you can also imagine what impact a sudden disruption will have on the households, on the economy entirely, I would say. Well, if you look at the demand outlook, which these are leading analysts of the world, and this is the Indian picture which they are telling us. So all of them, even the most conservative, you will find that at least for the next 5 years, everybody is showing a growth as far as the consumption pattern for India is concerned. Because our existing stock of vehicles, existing stock of equipment is so big that overnight or even in a span of 1 or 2 years, I don't think you can suddenly have a disruption or, renewables will take over. Yes, they are coming up. It's a good thing they are coming up. But then again, with the size and complexity which our country has, there will be growth, at least for the next 5 to 7 years. Thereafter, there may be a plateau which may come as far as the oil demand is concerned. And of course, very relevant is that we are expanding, demography is changing. Again, every citizen wants access to mobility, he wants access to modern electricity, wants access to clean cooking. So all these things are there and which are adding to the demand. Similar is the story for gas. Now gas will be basically, it will be one stage before we enter into a full renewable kind of era, especially for India. So from oil or from coal, we may step into gas, and we are already stepping into that space. When we are talking that right now our energy mix has only 6% share as far as gas is concerned, and the target is to increase it to 15% by 2030. So gas is the future, which I would say for the next 10 years. And then probably we get into, more advanced area like hydrogen or batteries. Of course, batteries will come in between, depending on how soon the cost comes down. But gas is going to play a very significant role. As far as electric, yes, lot of activities happening, lot of policy push is there. But if you look
sorry to interrupt you. If you can close your opening remark in 1 or 2 minutes, maybe we
yeah,
can discuss
this is
it
the last
in the
slide. Yeah.
second round. Yeah, okay, please
Sure.
carry on. Please carry on.
So again, in battery, if you look, whatever penetration rates we are showing and whatever even some other analysts are showing, for this we are talking about 2025. So they are in the range of 8 to 10% or 12 to 15% at best. So this is the last slide. What are key challenges as far as your renewables or alternates are concerned? Hydrogen, of course, it's a cost is the issue. Then carbon capture is again very high cost. Solar again, like the previous speaker had discussed certain issues. And batteries again, cost is an issue. So it's going to stabilize maybe a couple of years, and then probably you'll have a higher footprint of these 4 technologies. So I'll close here and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. So we have listened the fossil fuel side, coal and oil, and several issues are emerging. One is, of course, the fossil fuel divestment movement and the stranded asset which we are expecting from the oil and gas sector. Very interesting thing, which we all know that the term indoor air pollution, which has been neglected so far, and dirty air firewood or fuel wood burning is one of the reasons for this kind of thing, which has a lot of health impact on the economy. So if you calculate the indirect cost of the burning inferior fuel, you'll find there are several studies where the magnitude is huge, the cost of burning inferior biofuel. Now let us look at the other side of the story, the cleaner side, the renewables. And so Vinay, please, it is your turn.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, you are absolutely right.
Okay, good. So, unlike the previous speakers, I come from a smaller company, Bristol India, which everybody may not be familiar with. So I'll just take 30 seconds to introduce ourselves. We are a 10-year-old business specializing in focusing on clean energy. We provide consulting and research services to almost all the stakeholders in the industry. So that includes project developers, investors, financial institutions, contractors, equipment suppliers, and policymakers. We work across technologies, across business models, across applications. Now, I think this is a very, very relevant and interesting topic. I'm just going to spice things up a little bit and disagree with my previous speakers. I think, I'm slightly disappointed that, not just that we are not taking this issue seriously enough. The global warming has already reached 1.2 degrees out of the 1.5 degree threshold, and we are at a crisis point. The estimated emission space to reach 1.5 degree threshold of global warming is about 400 billion tons of carbon emissions. And we're already emitting 40 billion plus tons of carbon emissions every year. So if we continue to go down this path for 10 more years, assuming there is no increase in carbon emissions, then we've already reached the threshold of 1.5, and then it'll be too late to do anything. So I think obviously there are lots and lots of challenges which Mr. Sharma and Mr. Bhattacharya have pointed out to. There are technical challenges, financial challenges, market design challenges, and so on and so forth. But really, my point is this: that if your house is burning, you don't. Nobody argues how difficult it is to douse the fire. You do whatever it takes to douse the fire, and nobody argues that yes, I need to douse the fire, but I also have other priorities like entertainment, education, healthcare, etc. No, the first thing you do at the cost of everything else is you douse the fire. Similarly, and doesn't matter whether it is your neighbor who's lit the fire. It may be neighbor's house which may be burning, but your house will be burning next. So again, the first thing you do is not argue who started the fire, who's to be blamed, who should be held responsible. First thing you do is you douse the fire and make sure that you're safe. And I think we are at the cusp of this crisis, which if we don't address, we try to address immediately and urgently, I think it will be too late before we get there. So that was my point about urgency. Now, there are lots and lots of challenges. I'm not denying that at all. Renewable energy is intermittent. It is unreliable. We don't have enough land and transmission capacity for it. And we don't have the manufacturing capacity, and so on and so forth. So what do we need to do in order to achieve this 100% energy transition to get there? I can list out a number of steps, and each of these requires very extensive consultation. It's not a pain-free process. It requires a huge amount of effort across multiple stakeholders. There is a cost attached to it. There are various operational, policy, and other challenges attached to them. But my point really is that we have to go down this path because we have no other option. So what do we need to do? I say that renewables obviously is intermittent. So to make sure that we can absorb this intermittent source of energy and still meet demands of consumers on a 24/7 basis. We need to make the thermal plants more flexible. Now that is just a step on the path to net zero, but today the thermal plants have a very high inertia, which means that the ramp up and ramp down rates are very low, and they need to become more flexible so that they can come online and go offline depending on the profile of renewable energy, which helps us to increase the share of renewable energy in the grid. The consumer has a very, very important role to play in this. We have started working with some large corporate consumers, and one of the first things they have been doing as part of net zero is actually looking at energy conservation and energy efficiency. And I think that is the lowest hanging fruit in the whole puzzle. We hear stories all the time that companies have been able to reduce their carbon emissions by 20%, 30%, or even going up to 40 and 50% by adopting some relatively easy, affordable, and easy to implement technologies. I think we have to delink this whole process and relationship between growth and carbon emissions. Consumers, the government and the consumers need to emphasize and accelerate energy efficiency and conservation initiatives. And then there is something called demand side management, which we really don't have. In India, we believe that we have been deprived of energy for so long. Now it is our turn to consume as much as we possibly can. And because that is the only way for us to grow as an economy. But there are various ways in which demand side can be managed and demand can be brought down and made more suitable and more consistent with the time of the day based power output profile of renewables. And let me just give you some very, very small examples. I mean, even when I look out of the balcony in my house, I see the main road lit very, very brightly all across the night. Now, we can all argue that it is a fantastic thing to have a well-lit road, brightly lit, and providing a safe and secure transportation mechanism. But I know that there are companies in Europe and US which are actually trying all kinds of technologies to actually manipulate the lighting demand. So, for example, they can dim the lights, they can switch off the lights. There are all kinds of sensors based on time of the day of the year, weather pattern, etc., where these lights can be dimmed and switched off, and they automatically come on when there is a traffic or when there's a need for that power. So by doing that, there's a company I met. They have been able to reduce street lighting consumption by as much as 45% in Europe. Customers can be given all kinds of incentives to manipulate their demand. Today, we have a flat rate of energy, whether it is oil and gas, whether it is power. And again, we need to tell the consumer there is a cost to this energy consumption. There is a market pricing. Pricing should move up and down. If automatically the petrol price goes up, what do? We all reduce our petrol consumption. But power prices don't go up. In fact, power prices in India, because it is a highly regulated sector, and because the state governments see this as a way to win votes by keeping tariffs low, irrespective of what is happening to coal prices, what is happening to other factors, etc., power prices need to be linked to the market cost of producing power. And then they need to vary. If you go on the exchange, the daytime power is trading at 3 rupees and the evening power is trading at 8 rupees and going up to as high as 20 rupees sometimes. If we can have more time of the day pricing, customers can vary their demand pattern, and that will allow the share of renewable energy in the grid to grow. We need a very strong, proactive planning, decadal long planning on land and transmission. One of the key challenges that renewables have been facing as one of the largest users of land is that by the time a project comes to execution and it arranges land and transmission, it is already delayed by more than 2 years. And we cannot have that. Despite the government targets, before getting excited by the 500 gigawatt target, let us look back and see what happened to the 175 gigawatt target, which is due for next year. And we are only at 103 gigawatt right now. And one of the, so in other words, massively behind targets. So, and the same will happen to the 2030 target if we don't plan for land and transmission requirements right now, if we don't plan for manufacturing capacity right now, if we don't plan for minerals, the precious minerals, which India unfortunately doesn't have right now, if we don't invest in R&D, as a very, very price sensitive country, our main focus continues to be trying to bring the cost of power down. So what did we do with solar power? We let Germany and China and other countries increase the consumption. And when the cost of power came down to about 3 to 4 rupees, then we started buying solar in large quantity. Now, if we keep doing that with storage and with hydrogen, we will again be at the back of the queue in adopting these technologies and becoming leaders in R&D, in manufacturing, in the whole value chain. So I think we need to start adopting these technologies with much more gusto by investing in R&D, investing in minerals, investing in manufacturing, by providing incentives to the value chain. And finally, I would say that we need a complete change in the mindset. There is a perception that all these new technologies are very expensive. India cannot afford those. So let's wait. Let's wait. I would counter argue that this is how the world economy is going to evolve. Unless we see this as an opportunity, the alternate view that we continue down the same path and incur all these increasing costs of climate change, etc., to me, that is not a viable proposition. Sure, there is a cost of adopting these new technologies, but in my view, that cost is lower than the cost of climate change and other disasters, which would be in the status quo path. So I think we need to embrace the new world with complete enthusiasm. We need to accept that there is a cost and there are these challenges, and we would rather address these challenges than to argue that we should go down and keep the status quo scenario. So, Professor Ghosh, I'll stop here and then happy to go on to the next round.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think a very important thing which you are talking about is the flexibilization of the coal-fired power plants and the strategic metals and minerals. Some of them are coming under the category of rare earth metals that would be required for the clean energy transition. And unfortunately, not only we, the global scenario, China has almost monopoly power of processing of this rare earth metal. And that is a big challenge for the clean energy transition. So until and unless we create alternate supply chain of this rare earth metal, then the clean energy transition would be a difficult situation, probably would be a difficult situation, because we simply don't have enough supply side options to propel this kind of clean energy transition. So that is another very interesting thing. And maybe the flexibilization of power plant, I would like to take in the round two, the view of NTPC, how they are dealing with the flexibilization of the coal-fired power plants. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Puneet, and let us see what his modeling suggests towards the clean energy transition.
Hello.
Yeah, you are audible.
Oh, thank you. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Oh, great. So I'm just putting it on the slide mode. Yeah, so it's there now. So basically, I'll try to put all that has been said by my previous speakers together and how all this works out. So the premise is that we are not saying shut down all coal plants tomorrow. We are not saying that, and what we are saying is that you need to make institutional changes, market design changes in order to facilitate all this. Now, the study that I'm going to present is a summary study of a recent exercise that we did for NTPC and also for another client of ours, which I'll not name here, but yes, there is another client for whom the study was done, and NTPC. Now, clearly, we worked on the premise that achieving 500 or 450, whatever you may say, is an important target in the Indian journey towards net zero, because power sector, as pointed out by my previous speaker, Mr. Sharma, is very critical to the whole process. Now, in order to do that, I'll be quick. And if you go to point number 3 here, what I'm saying is that you need to be consistent. As Mr. Vinay pointed out, that what happened to 175 gigawatt target till now, we are 103, and we say that now as on date, roughly 60 or 70 gigawatt is in the pipeline. Now, we should not be doing this with our 2030 target. One is that what we did was we ran a capacity expansion planning model with all the unit commitment kind of details. So all the short-term dynamics built into our model, the exercise that we did for NTPC. This study clearly shows that if you add at least 35 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity, wind and solar, consistently from now till 2027, supported by at least 2,500 megawatt hour of storage systems, you can obviate the need for any more coal capacity addition beyond what has already been planned. So what is planned is fine. So, but then, and when I say what is planned is fine, what I also mean is that the retirement that has been planned or that is being considered should also be implemented simultaneously. So effectively, we don't add too much of coal capacity because some has been planned, so that gets added, but nothing beyond that. And we can, as was pointed out by my previous speakers, that it should not happen that we should compromise our economic growth. That is also not going to happen, because the scenarios suggest that there is no load shedding if you adopt this kind of a plan. And obviously, when we do all this, the role of, again pointed out in my point number 3 here, second bullet under point number 3, 9 gigawatt of thermal balance. Now, thermal balancers, what I mean is that basically this is a very high ramping gas-fired capacity supported by this. Why this capacity? Because this capacity, because with it, if 280 gigawatt of solar comes in, and we are going to see a huge dip in the duck curve. The back of the duck is going to be very steep, and the thermal generators, conventional thermal generators, may not have the capability to provide 2 or 3 cycle operations in a day, where gas engines or gas-based plants could play a very important role. The other alternative is that if technology advances and if you can flexibilize your existing coal-fired plants, good for the system. But we have not assumed that. So you could do that also. Now, in doing that, what are the institutional changes and market design changes that need to be taken up to implement this? Because this plan, point number 3, is out of a capacity expansion planning model. Now, capacity expansion planning models can tell us a lot of things, but how do we implement all this? Implementation of all this is possible if you are able to create appropriate revenue streams for the kind of assets that you are planning to have in the system. Revenue streams get created through changes in market design. A proper ancillary services market design, where ancillary services are actually paid for and not paid for through the deviation settlement mechanism. Because the current proposals of CRC and others, they say that the ancillary services, the financing of ancillary services is happening through the collections out of the deviation payment that is made. Now, deviation is energy, is imbalance energy. So imbalance energy cannot pay for the ancillary capacity. So proper capacity market there. And then to aid that capacity to come in, you need the point number 6 here that I mentioned here, that you need a capacity market where the capacities get procured and a co-optimized energy and ancillary services market. Now, I mean, this was the executive summary. I get into the slide details. I'll do it quickly. I know there is a paucity of time. Right. Now, we look at because we are talking about, now I am trying to talk about the enabling frameworks for net zero. Now, in that direction, CRC has taken the right step of coming up with the draft ancillary services regulations. However, these regulations need to trickle down to the states, because these regulations require that the area control error at the regional level must be maintained at the level of plus minus 10 megawatts. 10 plus minus 10 megawatt at a regional level is possible if and only if the states make adequate investments in the fleet of assets that they have to manage any overdraw or underdraw from the grid. The other alternative is that you can reduce that to a certain extent by implementing an embed or a centralized dispatch framework as fast as possible. But even when you do that, each state will each state will be required to maintain area control error within a certain range. So therefore, these aspects, that the regulations, that the central regulations need to trickle down to the state, else RLDCs on their own or the regional load dispatch centers on their own may not be able to achieve what is sought to be achieved. Now, what we did was, when I say that it must trickle down to the states, we did a simulation of 3 states and 3 renewable heavy states. This is Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. Now, this was a very detailed unit commitment type of an exercise that we did. I'm sorry that the meaning of this yellow, green, and brown is not there, but I'll just tell you what this means is. So here I'm just presenting 2 scenarios for the state of Tamil Nadu here. Now, what it tells me is that, so what we tested through this simulation is that if the states were to have some amount of battery energy storage systems today, as has already been said by MOP, that we must go in for batteries today. We should not wait for 2026 or 2027 for batteries to come in. Most simulation models that are based on national level simulations say that the batteries are required by 2026, 2027, but those simulations don't model the reality of the Indian power system, that we have a net pool and not a gross pool. Each state schedules power plants on their own, and centralized dispatch is not there. So that flexibility is not there. So so we did these simulations for the three states, and in the state of Tamil Nadu, I just give you an example here. So what is, if you look at the hydro bar here under both the conditions. Now, hydro is, this brown represents how much energy is being provided, and others are 4 kinds of ancillary services. Now, if you want to operate the system reliably, because that is one of the agenda of the topic given to us today, that net zero implications for reliability. Now, reliability of energy supplies. Now, if electricity has to be supplied reliably, ancillary services have to be provided. Now, if I try to provide the same amount of ancillary services as are required in today's power system, which is my scenario 1, my hydro resources and my lignite resources and my coal resources provide ancillary support along with the energy provision. Now, what I do is, if I augment my existing systems with battery and with internal combustion gas engines, which are very flexible, what I find is that my hydro, the energy output, the energy contribution of my hydro increases, and for ancillary services, I start relying on what I call as thermal balancers here and the battery energy storage systems. As a result of which, what we found is that actually, if you have these assets in place today, in today's power system, Rajasthan would be able to reduce their costs up to 7 crore per 7 crore per day. Tamil Nadu 3.2 crore savings in variable costs. Gujarat 4.66 crore, and with these costs, these states could recover the cost of investment in these assets in less than 10 years. Now, having said that, these are further details of how these assets help us reduce the cost by freeing up conventional capacities from providing ancillary resources and actually reducing the cycling of some of the conventional resources, because if I cycle my conventional resources too much, there is heat rate degradation and my costs go up. So these are detailed simulations for these states, which we did, and based on that we found that I mean, as I mentioned, and as is the title in this slide, that installation of BESS and thermal balancers reduce the overall system cost in these 3 states that we saw. Now, now our expansion planning exercise that we did shows that India can achieve the target of 450 or 500 gigawatts by 2030 by investing in renewables very consistently and by also investing in battery energy storage systems. And to this effect, I really appreciate the steps taken by Ministry of Power and SECI. SECI came out with this tender in Rajasthan where they are setting up this where they are asking for 1000 megawatt hour of battery energy storage system. I think that's a very prudent thing to do and the right thing to do, as was being discussed by as was being talked about by Mr. Vinay, that investments need to be made now. SECI has started the job in but this needs to be further augmented by creating appropriate market designs, because currently it is happening through SECI. Good, but I mean, as a consultant, I can tell you that I am being approached by a lot of interested parties in that SECI tender, and what they are asking me, all of them are asking me a single question. They're asking me a single question that, Puneet, please tell us what are the value, because that SECI tender says that 70% is a guarantee offtake and 30% is through merchant route. Now, all these parties that are approaching me ask me the same question. Say that for that 30%, please tell us what are the value streams. Now, the value streams can come only when the market designs are changed to something what I mentioned in this slide. You need a capacity market where the capacities can be procured, and as I had mentioned, that with the savings in the variable cost, the states will be able to pay for the capacity costs in these assets immediately. I mean, and within a period of 10 years, sorry, not immediately, within a period of 10 years. However, this cost can be further reduced, because if I look at the needs of Rajasthan, for example, Rajasthan peak.
Puneet, sorry to interrupt you. Can you conclude in 1 minute, because we have another session, and then maybe you can discuss this thing.
Sure. So Rajasthan peak happens between 10 to 12 in the morning. Haryana and Punjab happen in the evening time. So they don't need to procure capacity separately. The same capacity can be procured through a capacity market which can serve both, and hence you can reduce your time also. So basically, as I have already mentioned, you need capacity markets. The driver of capacity market is a resource adequacy requirement framework. The definition of resource adequacy requirement is given in the second box here. So that along with the first three, the important part is that assets that can provide appropriate flexibility also need to be a part of resource adequacy requirements. Then this is all this I have already talked about. Can do net zero we can contribute through power sector to net zero, one, by consistently adding capacities, but the capacities will get added if appropriate market design changes are made and the investments are forthcoming. I see a lot of interest in the market to investment in batteries, and I, for one, and I'm sure many others, are very hopeful that India can do it if we make these changes and if we remain positive about the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Puneet. With this, our first round is over. I can see several, comments or questions in the chat box. Before going to that, since Mr. Bhattacharya will be leaving by 3:30 sharp, if you just share your company's, a plan about this flexibilization of the power plant, and two things, and the plan for cleaner coal technology with carbon capture storage. If you just throw some light on these two aspects.
Yes, Professor, and very absorbing discourses going on, and thanks to all my co-panelists. One thing I have found that there is a general understanding and general unison that things must change. Business as usual can't help. But I was slightly disturbed by Vinay's very passionate pitch on house on fire. I request Vinay, let us not be alarmist and let us not be scaremonger. By being so, we'll undermine our own position as a country as well as economy. We all know that creating policy sitting on ivory tower gets totally dealing from the realities on the ground. If I stop the coal-fired power stations today, how many billions of people will be affected? You will be saving on your carbon space. Maybe 1.5 degree will become 1.4 degree, but whether you leave, somebody will come and either snatch or kill you because he is thrown out of his livelihood. So there is a huge debate. We need to be very careful about it, that it has to be in a transition way, in a way which is graded, and it has to be as per every country's own design based on their own reality. Mr. Chitkara is a known person. He told that this presentation he is making out of the consultancy we had given to them. Yes, I am aware this we have discussed. This is the consultancy we have given to him. But the issue is that copy paste of some other country's development model may not be appropriate for us. I have a family silver. I keep it underground and simply go elsewhere to borrow or beg will not give me any kind of either stability or development tomorrow. Don't mind my saying very strict and straight. I already said energy trilemma is one of the most fundamental thing everybody has agreed. And this concept is a Western concept, not my concept. And it says that energy trilemma includes energy availability, affordability, and accessibility, which in totality creates the energy equity. If we go by the concept of equity, which is so fundamental in the minds of all of us, especially the thought leaders in the Western countries, we must demand for the carbon space equity. And that is what I said. Why should I douse my fire, which was created by somebody else? Mr. Rastogi is very right that when there is a fire, I should not debate what is the reason for fire, douse it. But I must also take care before the fire comes that who is responsible for it. Mr. Sharma has told that India per capita emission is 1/3 of the world average. Mr. Sharma, what he did not say, I can share with you, Mr. Sharma definitely knows it, that in USA, it is 10 times of what I get per capita emission. So why should I allow an American to have 10 houses when my own person doesn't have even a single house? That's not the equity. So I will have a strong pitch that forget about everything else. Don't go by the theory being propelled by many people in COP21, COP26. Everybody has their own point of view. Let us talk of equity, which has been told by India many times. Let us talk of per capita emission and discuss about it. If I go for importing of such new equipments, two things will happen. One, loss of livelihood leading to political chaos and economic disruption. Nobody can afford, especially democracy like us cannot afford. Second will happen, foreign exchange outgo. Very soon we'll go back to the 91 days of 1991, when we had to go to the Fort Knox, we all know. We have coal, we have oil, we have sufficient technology, manufacturing capacity, everything is there. We should not shun it overnight. As I said, that we should be very clear that it's a sundown or it's a sun set industry, the coal and oil industry. We all agree. Issue is whether it is 3 p.m., 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. If I say it is already 10 p.m., then goodness gracious be. What will happen? Will foreclose all our options which have been created painstakingly by this country, which was not so rich, rather poor when we became independent, and trying to reach an aspiration level of growth path, will simply foreclose all these options and go with a begging bowl to the developed countries and ask for their money. If I go for solar panel import, whose economy do I serve? You think it's only China? China is a manufacturer. Definitely it serves this thing. But all the IP rate goes to the Western countries. Please look at the chain. It's not a political pitch. We have to be careful where from the discourses come. And we should be rationalist. We should not only be nationalists, we should be having a worldview. So I caution my all fellow speakers and the distinguished attendees here, let us be rationalist. I have no hesitation to say that we need to go for graded change. And I give big thumbs up to our Prime Minister for making it instead of 2047, which was being touted by many as net zero, to make it 2070. Because we have our own aspirations and requirement. Now, what will happen to 1.5 degrees centigrade? There is a concept of polluters to pay. Who created this situation of 1.25 degrees centigrade? So let the polluter pay. If the polluter pays, let them give us the technology in terms of payment. Let them give us the additional loan required, concessional. The trillions of dollars America is paying for the priming of its post-COVID economy. They can jolly well pay some more trillions for us to change over. My assets will be stranded. Having said that, I will tell one or two things that we have done. Chitkara has already told. The very fact that this consultancy we have commissioned through them is what we are doing. We are very aware of all these things. We are ahead of the market, always have been, and will continue to remain ahead of the market. We are switching away from coal. We are going more into renewable. But for us, renewable is not only solar or wind. We are not sure about the storage. In my opinion, storage may or may not have that kind of reliability, and ultimately it may go out, fizzle out. The reality that we are very clearly working on, and Indian Oil has taken a leading position, is the hydrogen economy, change over to hydrogen. NTPC is looking to hydrogen. NTPC is reducing its carbon footprint for the conventional coal-fired power stations. NTPC is also going into the nuclear. Very soon you will see we are going in a big way into nuclear. And nuclear is not a carbon emitter. The other concerns of safety, geopolitics, NSG, and the nuclear waste hazard, all these things will be addressed. Nothing comes free, and everything has to be seen in holistically. While saying so, I'll also tell regarding flexibilization, yes, there is a big issue. None of these power stations were designed to work as anything other than base load. But we have never worked as a base load so long as NTPC power stations are concerned. Since our inception and in 75, for 25 years, India was so much deficient that it was a PLF. Then it started stabilizing a bit. But over last 10 years, all our power stations are working in a flexible mode. We go as low as 55%. And many of the power stations we have experimented can jolly well go to 40%. But the issue is somewhere else. The more you go to the lower PLF, you destroy the life of the power station. Anyone having basic idea about the power station and the metallurgy will agree to this. So that means at a huge cost to the economy of the country, we are a national company. But we'll be doing that in a more graded way. We'll not suddenly go to 20%. I'll give you another example that people keep on preaching us that you reduce, go for flexibilization, etc. I was talking to the board director on the board of EDF France some days ago. The lady director, let me not name, you must have understood by this time. We are signing an MOU with her with them, EDF. And after that, we had a long discussion about net zero and way forward. You know what she said? She said, we have understood that we made a mistake in going prematurely towards zero carbon and all renewable concept. We are now going back to the gas-based economy. We are now ready to look at the possibility of setting up more gas-based units. We are very seriously going to expand our nuclear fleet. I asked what happened to the anti-nuclear lobby in France and Germany. They told I can share with you some documents where they have basically apologized to the French countrymen that we have been unusually alarmist. I told, what about Germany? They are doing 100% of the drawal of electricity from the green grid. They told Germany has an advantage of drawing from the European grid. 70% of the grid is supplied by France, which is nuclear. So these are the discourses we must look through and understand very clearly. We should not come in the hands of some other people as a pawn and ultimately serve their purpose. In NTPC, we are very clear about it, and we are doing not only on the flexibilization.
Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. I think first of all, it is very interesting to know that NTPC is going in the nuclear front, because that is one fuel which is grossly clean in nature has been neglected in the entire discussion. But I think a quick response from Vinay and Puneet. Please go ahead.
So
Yeah,
should
sure. I think, this is a very, very complex topic, and it is really not possible to do justice to it in the short time we have, but it's good that we have different viewpoints. There are obviously issues of equity and, responsibility here. And by whatever I said, I did not say that, India should, do it its own way, etc., and other countries should not be held responsible. The point is, this is a very limited window of time to kind of air viewpoints, and so it is not possible to cover all the perspectives. My view is, yes, other countries are responsible. Yes, they have had 90% of the share of emissions. They should be held responsible. I would look at it slightly differently, though, saying that instead of waiting until 2070, I would argue, but because personally I am very passionate about it, and I would argue, given the urgency, India should say that we will do 2050, but now subject to the other countries doing it by 2035 and funding us to the tune of X dollars, etc., etc. So I would put the ball back in their court on that front. In any case, I think, and neither did I argue that the oil and gas industry should stop immediately. No, not at all. Absolutely not. We do see, in particular, I think India is heavily dependent on coal, will be heavily dependent on coal for the next 15, 20 years for the majority of its power. So there has to be a gradual transition. I'm not arguing against that at all. But all I said was that, yes, there are challenges on the path to energy transition and renewables, but we start fixing those challenges, and we need more urgency on that roadmap. Rather than say that, let's just, somebody else is responsible, so we'll take our own time. So it was just a different positioning of the argument, but very happy to hear Mr. Bhattacharya's and Mr. Sharma's points of view.
Thank you. Puneet, please go ahead.
Sure, thanks. A few quick points. One is that we consider co-firing of gas with hydrogen. So the engines that are considered in the model are capable. We have checked with the manufacturers of the engines whose configuration has been modeled, that they are capable of handling today as on date up to 25% hydrogen. So that's perfectly possible here, and also going into the future with hydrogen is also considered in the model. Nuclear is also, and in fact, on 7th, I made a detailed, I was discussing this thing in detail with some students at MDI, which was hosted by Professor Ghosh, where I gave the details of the detailed results of the expansion planning model, and there too nuclear also gets added. So it's not that the nuclear was not getting added, nuclear gets added there, but and hydrogen plays an important role, increasingly important role, but after 2026 and all, because that time there is a fuel switching and the engines start picking up hydrogen instead of gas. So that happens, but that happens slightly later in this decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yes, Mr. Sharma, I would like to add something.
I think we had a fairly good discourse, a lot of discussion, and I think everybody agrees that yes, there are no two opinions about the challenge of climate. I think it is something which is very, very vital. Similarly, pollution, especially in big cities, we are all victims of pollution here. So we have to take some real strong measures, but only thing I think, coming back to my argument, it has to be slightly graduated, more calibrated, because if you look at the complexity of the country and so much of diversity and so much maybe inequality also economically. So I think overall we'll have to have a very, and I think that's the plan of the government, the way things are happening. Even at Indian Oil, we are also working in the hydrogen space, we are working in electric space, we are working in battery. We are also getting a very, very bullish on biofuels. So being a traditional fossil fuel company, maybe 10 years back, nobody would have thought that we will foray into such areas, which are competing areas. But then I think this is more it's a larger, issue for humanity. So we also, as a responsible corporate, are trying to get into those areas. And even in our fossil fuels, like even NTPC, every day some technology or something we are doing just to try and reduce whatever harmful effects are there of the emissions and all those. So overall, I think an interesting round of discussion.
I just wanted to ask you about your experience about the hydrogen economy, because IOCL is I think for several years they are working on that domain. So you just share a few your experience about the yes Mr. Bhattacharya, I know you have to leave.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, I have a meeting with the Secretary Power. I have to leave right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, it has been very absorbing session, and thanks to all my co-panelists and others. And Vinay, I have not misunderstood you. I agree with you on fundamental things. We all agree on the fundamentals, that there is no second opinion, that things must change, right?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.
So on hydrogen,
Yes,
what
please.
IOC basically right now, we are doing some trials in Delhi, where we are using this hydrogen in CNG, spiking CNG with hydrogen, and doing some trials for Delhi Transport Corporation here in Delhi itself. Some 50 buses are running on that. That is one. Then secondly, for producing green hydrogen, recently we have also announced that we'll be setting up a facility at our refinery in Mathura. So a lot of work is going on. We have a very advanced R&D center at Faridabad, which is basically into this activity. So a lot of, plus hydrogen is the ultimate in the sense that if you are able to have green hydrogen, which is kind of, something which is maybe less than $2 a kg or something, then probably that would be a dream come true kind of.
Okay, thank you. I think I can see there are a lot of questions and remarks, but unfortunately the statements are too large. So if you just, some of you can ask the question only, not the observation. Very quick question if you would like to ask to our panelists. Just unmute and ask your question.
So I am Rajan Varshne from NTPC. I would like to suggest we should go for co-firing with hydrogen or biomethane or biogas or even imported gas. That will reduce our need for flue gas FGD and also NOx control, because by this lot of energy will be like sulfur content will be within the specified limits, and also a lot of other savings will be there, like less coal will be transported, less energy will be deployed in transportation, and also ash management will be lesser than what is presently being done. And this will also control the SPM levels and the pollution also. and water usage, water conservation also.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
So
thank you.
why we are not implementing in balance plants where FGD is not there, such co-firing arrangements?
So we'll take that. Maybe Puneet?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, no. So definitely, I mean, these are, on fuel switching, this is definitely an option. And from a modeling perspective, I can tell you that we have considered that. And the only thing is that there can be debate about costs, but then that is fine. I mean, that always happens in any kind.
Thank you.
But
Any
there
other
are
questions?
savings. In FGD, we are investing around 1 crore per megawatt, and other pollution, etc. Other things are also not getting controlled, except the SOx.
Right. So that is basically, yeah, true. Completely agree.
Thank
No
you.
doubt.
Thank you. Any other question? Just
Yes.
yes, please. Akshay, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. It was very good to hear. Just one quick question. I'm Akshay Singla from Maruti Suzuki. So, right now, everybody is focusing on achieving the net zero goals. So, should companies not focus on how much carbon they're emitting in the atmosphere at the first place, rather than targeting okay, if we can balance the equation by absorbing that amount? So, what is your insights about how much they're emitting on part?
Who will take that? Maybe Mr. Sharma is the right person.
Yeah, I think different companies have different emissions, so one can't have an average of that. But as far as IOC is concerned, yes, we are keeping a track of how much carbon emissions happening, and we have a full-fledged department which is looking after sustainability. So very mindful of this issue. And I think any responsible corporate today, when we are talking about ESG, I think probably everyone is keeping a track of carbon emissions and working towards reduction.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. So,
So
any
ESG
quick
is
insights
another
about
domain is going on, but there is another side of the ESG, but this is not the right platform to discuss this thing. But
Right.
ESG investment is going somewhere different in a very peculiar direction. There's a investigative study by I think MIT or I can't remember, but it shows the other side, the dirty side of ESG investment. Let's put it that way, the dirty side of the ESG investment. But anyway, yes. Next question, please.
just a follow-up on that? Any insights on what are carbon credits? Is a hot topic right now, and many companies are talking about carbon credits. If somebody gives them, so they have an allowance to emit more carbon. Any quick insights on the carbon credit?
Vinay, if you can take this.
Sure. So carbon credit is not really an allowance for emitting more carbon. The point really is that, let's say a company has 100 units of emissions, and when they have to measure their emissions. They have to have a complete inventory of how much emissions are there, what are the sources of the emissions, etc., etc. And then they should start working on reducing those emissions. Now, reducing some emissions is easier, and some is difficult, and some is almost impossible. And the whole point about net zero is that the emissions which are almost impossible to abate can then be set it off by using other techniques, whether it is buying carbon credits or investing in initiatives like afforestation, carbon capture and storage, or any other such mechanisms. So it is just a tool which one equalizes the price of carbon mitigation across different consumer segments and industries. And second, it allows consumers or carbon emitters to offset their almost impossible to abate emissions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is a question. Yes.
Yeah. Hello. I'm
Yeah,
Saroj
please go ahead.
Chaluri from NTPC.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Puneet here. I had gone through your strategy reports in detail. And so I just want to ask you, when we were talking about, electric vehicles and the electrification part of the, energy transitions, the more and more electrification we have for the vehicles in the transport sector, along with the electric vehicle comes the storage also. Any vehicle, we will be able to store around 50 to 60 units of electricity. Okay, so every day there will be a charging. So if we multiply with the number of lakhs and lakhs of electric vehicles coming, so we are creating a storage in the electric vehicles, that is a distributed storage. Point one is this. Point number two is, like, when we talk about flexible power and flexibility of power stations, and this, there again, the electrification of the vehicles will play a major role in in flattening the curve there. I mean, none of the studies I have seen account for those these two factors.
I'll send you a few studies that account for these.
Okay, thank you. I think Sachin from IOCL, you have a question?
I have one, sir.
Sachin?
This is Sukanya.
Yeah, Sachin, I think Sachin's mic is not working. Okay, you can try it. Yeah, Sukanya, please go ahead.
Okay. I have two very small questions. Not questions. I need to understand your opinion on net zero in the era of IR 4.0. That is one. And secondly, though Mr. Rastogi kindly sort of touched upon it, but solar in the the consumption, total energy, world energy consumption of solar is minuscule compared to its annual potential. So given the political climate and geographical preconditions impacting this industry, how do you see this improving? So these are the two small thoughts that I need from you, all of you, all the panel.
Thanks, Sukanya. I did not get the first part of your question. I don't know who it was addressed to.
I was just asking that, what's your opinion on net zero in the era of Industrial Revolution 4.0?
I think it genuinely is Industrial Revolution 4.0. I think because it requires such a vast systemic change. Energy is very, very integral to our economy, and the whole production, the logistics, the transmission, the distribution, all of these systems need a very significant overhaul for us to get to a net zero economy. So it requires complete change in the way energy is produced, it is transported, consumed by us, sold by the government, the way it is traded on the exchange. So, and that is why I do believe that it's going to create massive business opportunities. I mean, we all talked about challenges and costs, etc. But actually, it's a huge business opportunity. We already, even in such a short space of time in India, we have multi-billion-dollar companies who are only in the renewable energy segment, and we are still only 10% penetration of renewable power into the grid. So it is a huge investment opportunity. The government has just run a tender for solar manufacturing. They received proposals for 55 gigawatts of solar manufacturing. If all of those capacities do come up, there itself you have a few tens of billions of dollars of investment. So it is a huge opportunity. It is genuinely IR 4.0. In terms of the second question about growth of solar, so yes, solar today, I believe on an average is about 4% penetration across the world, which is very similar to what it is in India. It has got a long way to go. But nobody is saying that net zero can only be achieved by 100% solar. There are solar and wind alone are not going to do it. And that is why we need a massive investment in technology, R&D, and finding better sources of other sources of technology, whether it is nuclear, whether it is biomass and other things, etc., etc. So we need to keep working towards it. There is no study which says, which shows what is the theoretical cap on solar. But clearly solar alone is not going to do it, and solar and wind alone are not going to do it. So we still are far away from finding the right optimal mix in the energy chain for the net zero world.
Thank you so much. Any other question?
Thank you so much.
Any other question? there is a question which is pointed to me, but I should not be a part of this panel. So this is regarding Sachin. I think I saw your question, but I don't know what to answer. Yes, we did an analysis about the life cycle cost of ultra supercritical, and subcritical technology along with solar and wind. And whatever we have found that wind and solar is costlier in terms of life cycle cost. Our study is also in line with other academic studies. By the way, and I made it very clearly because I put emphasizing the term academic because the life cycle cost which we have calculated using the data taken from all the government sources, and whenever there is a bit of confusion, means for example 2 data points available, we try to give inbuilt penalty on solar. Means if there are 2 data points where one, if we apply one, the LCOE will go slightly down, that giving the advantage to coal, and another it will go up. We take that figure, so that deliberately we try to inflate the LCOE of coal, all the coal technologies. And opposite we did on the solar and wind, where we have given all the advantage has been given. But even in that situation, what we have found that yes, life cycle cost of solar is higher than the coal. This is also in line with other studies, academic studies, where we have found that it's the same. Now the question appears that how to deal with this additional thing. So again, there are studies where it is suggesting that majority of the countries, because it has an impact on the economy. Whatever we are trying to do, and it's very, I think some of you have already mentioned that it is not about energy. You should not look energy in isolation. It is the linkage between energy and economy. How energy and economy are interlinked with each other, and it's a very complex relationship. The relationship is not the way that just put 2 graphs and try to explain this thing. We have did that modeling. It's a very complex relationship. There are structural break, there are regime switching, there are asymmetries, all kinds of complex phenomena are there with that relationship. But yes, some of the countries are dealing with this kind of additional cost, like say, for example, China actually ignoring that total thing. The US is giving, I think, significant amount of subsidy on those gaps to bridge that gap, and for European countries they pass it to the consumers. So yes, there are different studies available, well, that's what I can say. So any other question or observation quickly? I've already crossed the time limit to 3:48, I guess. Yes, there is another comment. Thank you. Okay. So anyway, if there is no other questions, so let us.
Hello.
Yes, please, Subham, please go ahead and ask your question only.
Yeah. So right. My question was related to the transition to the renewable energy, and there is consensus that if we introduce renewable energy, it will definitely save our environment. But my question is, even if we have the renewable source of energy, we are still not reducing our emissions. And I gave the example of a green air conditioner. Even if I have a green air conditioner, it is still all the emissions. So is there a plan to reduce the emissions as well, even though the source may be greener?
Retirement of plants. So there is a plan. I mean, there is not, I won't say that there is a plan. There is a list of around capacity of around 43 gigawatt that could be considered for retirement. And of that, confirmed retirement after talking to various, after talking to the owners of the plants, is roughly in the range of 11 gigawatt. Rest depends on how fast people want to breathe clean air.
Okay, thank you so much. With this, I think we should close our session.
Thank you.
So I must thank all our speakers for enlightening us with the transition which is taking place, and I also thank to all the participants for your views. I can see several comments in the chat box. for actively participating in this debate. As a student of energy, my understanding is that at this point, and see the net zero which we are talking about is a long horizon, and fortunately or unfortunately, none of us would be there by 2030 to see that what is going to happen. So my understanding, nobody is saying that net zero tomorrow. So it is talking about net zero in a long horizon. And in between, we can expect that there may be many technological disruptions and innovations. At this point, I think the debate is not between coal or oil versus renewables. It is coal, oil, and renewables. That is the important. We need to find out the right energy mix with environmental responsibility, which can supply the basic point which I have mentioned, that reliability and affordability. Affordability is a very important issue, because if the energy price is unaffordable, it will have an impact on the macroeconomy, and there will be a feedback effect on the energy sector. As I told, that relationship between the energy and economy is very, very complex in nature. So with this, thank you so much. Thanks for all the participants. Thank all our distinguished speakers. Have a great day, and keep thinking. That is most important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
insights.
Bye,
Thanks,
bye,
sir.
take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Bye.